I'll tell you a story about people not expecting you. This is from my time as the XO of the ship. So I was the XO, and I lived over in Newport News where we were building the ship. And so it was late at night, about 11 o'clock at night, and I decided I had nothing to do. I was going to go over the ship and see what was going on. You got to go. Sometimes you got to go over the weekends and, whatever. So about 11 o'clock, I went over the ship and I went down to the reactor spaces, and it was a kind of a construction space. The guy should have had hard hats on, right? And safety glasses. So I walk in there, and as soon as they see me, I see these guys scurrying around, putting their hard hats and safety glasses. So I will go up to him and I say, so how are we doing, guys? Oh, fine, sir. Well, give me a report on what's going on down here. I heard we were doing this tonight or something. Yes, sir, and blah, 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 blah. So I think for a minute they thought they got away with it. They got away with it. So I said, okay, great. Good to see you guys. I'm going after whatever I'm going to do. I said, by the way, if I ever come down here again and you're not wearing your safety equipment, you're all going on report. I'm serious. We don't mess around with safety equipment. This is ridiculous. It's your own good. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I said, okay. Yeah. And I said, you never know when I'm going down here. I just live a mile away. Yes, sir. So I started to walk away. I turned my back to him, and one of the guy goes, he says, hey, XO, why did you come down here tonight? And I said, well, I'm not married, and so I didn't have a warm body to crawl in next to, and I didn't have a dog to kick, so I came down here to see you guys. Okay. So I started to walk away, and they said, hey, XO. I said, yes. They said, can we buy you a dog? So, little sailor humor there. I said, no, but I'll see you guys later. True story. That's awesome. Sailors, they're just wonderful people.
Stan, welcome back to 10% True. Thanks for joining us on the channel again.
Great to be here. Thank you, Steve.
For the audience listening at home, you will be able to tell by that introduction that there is a part 1 to this video. I'll put a link in the description and put a card up above. So if you haven't listened to part 1, where Stan outlines his experience flying as a bombardier nav, the A-6 during the Vietnam Air War, please do go and listen to that first. It will probably help contextualize some of the things that Stan is going to talk to us about in this episode. So the plan with Stan is that we're going to go through a discussion around the maturation, the development of the A6 as an airframe, as a weapon system. When we reach the end of that conversation, we'll come back and start talking about Stan's experience in command. So initially commanding an A6 squadron, but then of course going on to be the captain or the commander of a carrier battle group, which I'm very, very excited to hear about. Before we do that, I have to thank Goreo. So Goreo is an individual who, that's not his real name, but that's the name he goes by on the Discord channel, for the 10% True Discord channel. His name is up to him to disclose that into the public domain, but I'll just call him Goreo. Goreo, thank you for introducing me to Stan. It's been a fascinating experience talking to him, and I really appreciate you doing that. So with that introduction done and the necessary thanks done, there were a couple of questions just to sort of top and tail, Stan, your recollection of flying the A6 in Vietnam that I wanted to ask before we moved on. So the first was just around, and you covered this before we hit record, so it's not that I'm deaf, but I just want, for the audience's benefit, to know that I asked the question. So EA6A, that was the electronic attack version of the A6 that came into service. But you said you never saw it. Did you hear anything about it? Do you know, did it have a reputation? Was it employed?
It was kind of before my time. So when I got to Vietnam, we had the EA6B, and we had they had them on our second cruise. Fortunately, up north where we needed them, and they were we loved having them. They were, I think, very effective. They were so rare or valuable, I guess, and so few that they wouldn't let them go over land with us. But they stood off and did a remarkable job of jamming on the radars and the search radars and fire control radars and that sort of thing. They were lifesavers. Again, as a junior officer, I don't have much data, and I wasn't didn't spend a lot of time up north without EA-6Bs, but I think they made a difference. I really do. So it's not hard data that I can work with. It's just empirical, basically.
Okay.
So we were really, really glad to have them there.
Let me ask before we carry on talking about the A6 family then. I wanted to ask, and we ran out of time last time, really on my account, not you, but I had to go. But I wanted to ask around your general observations when you left the Vietnam conflict as an aviator, your observations around the A6, around what had worked well, what had not worked well. You talked in the last episode about exceptional capability, bombing low level at night, being able to hit pinpoint targets, the ability to map the radar and pick out a house from amongst many houses, and then put a weapon onto that house. Were there things about the airplane that did not work well? Were there things that you looked at and thought, well, I hope they improve that, and then did they improve those things?
Well, from a mechanical standpoint, the airplane had problems with the generators. They were constant speed drive generators, and they were a huge problem, which the airplane later fixed. It was much later, but they did fix that problem, put in new Sunstrand generators. We had a few electrical problems, not too many. The airframe, with the exception of the generators, was pretty hardy, and the airframe was extremely hardy and resilient in terms of combat damage. I mean, we called it Grumman Iron Works for good reasons, to come back with holes in the airplane that you had no clue were there, and to take hits that you didn't even know about, and come back. And one night I remember a young plane captain said, "Hey, Lieutenant, go back here, look at this big hole in the horizontal stabilizer." And I said, "I'd rather not." You guys give that to the metalsmiths. And but it was a truck. It was tough. Even in terms of the engines being damaged with foreign objects. You could fly an entire flight and then come back and they would tell you your engine was, they called it FOD, with some foreign damage, but the engines were tough. They withstood that and didn't give you a fire warning light and didn't give you any problems. On the avionics side, the computer was very fragile, as we kind of discussed in the first podcast, and not only was it fragile, but it was limited in memory, as I talked about. You could only put in one turn point at a time. So as soon as you went to that turn point, you had to type in the next one. So you could only work with two turn points at any given time, one that you were going to, and then the next one. So after every turn point, instead of worrying about other things, you had to sit there and type stuff into the keyboard while you'd rather have been doing other stuff. So it put some extra workload on the bombardier and the crew. So computer memory and fragility. The radar was pretty reliable, but it didn't have the definition that the A6E radar had. Just a case in point, when you came back to the field or when you went to an airfield, there was a mode in the airplane called the landing mode, and you could put the cursors on the ground and then put in landing mode, and it would give the pilot the clues with his steering bug over there to get on glide slope and get down the glide slope and land where the cursors were. And I could put the airplane down right next to the mirror, the Fresnel lens, because it gave the definition of the runway was fantastic, and you could even see the lens, and you could. I mean, it was eons forward from the A6A radar, and so in terms of finding a building or something, it was infinitely easier. Or finding a target or a specific vehicle or whatever. As we discussed previously, it was very difficult to interpret what you were seeing, the blips, we call them, on the A6 radar. and interpret them into finding a particular building. And you certainly weren't, able to put it on the roof or in a window. You were just hoping to hit the building with, a number of bombs that you'd string across the target. So there was a quantum leap mostly on the BN side, and then when the forward-looking infrared radar was introduced, it came on after the A-6E was introduced to the fleet, but soon after. It was unbelievable. To be able to put the cursors in the vicinity of the target and then turn it over to the FLIR and then see the door or the window or whatever that you wanted to put your LGB into was, to my old A6A bombardier's mind was incredible, unbelievable. So it enhanced the ability of the A6 to hit the target immensely by having absolutely precise cursor placement. And by the way, the track radar, which gave you vertical separation, was a separate radar, which gave you vertical separation, which is very important. It's instead of knowing the altitude of the target and kind of knowing what your altitude is and subtracting, it actually measures it. And so the enhanced capability of the track radar and then the specific cursor placement allowed from having the much better radar and then the infinitely better FLIR placement of the cursors was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So it was a quantum leap, absolutely quantum leap.
Can I ask just to go back in time a little bit then? So one of the things you're getting from the A6E then is a precision capability. Had you integrated any laser-guided weaponry onto the airplane during Vietnam? Was there a mission for you to carry a pod or to drop LGBs, the earliest Paveway 1 series weapons, or was that something you had done?
Right, not in my squadron. There were squadrons out there that were flying the A6 Charlie that was basically experimenting with laser-guided weapons. I mean, it was it was an operation evaluation. They call it OPEVAL, which is usually done ashore in a test squadron. We were sort of doing, and we do that occasionally with weapons. We put them in OPEVAL over the target, and it was working really well. But we didn't have it in my squadron, unfortunately.
Okay. What about again? I'm going to come back to the E in a second, but what about the D? Where did the A6? And you'll have to forgive me. So there was KA-6D.
KA-6D. It was
that's where the D
tanker.
went. Okay. It
was a straight tanker.
Okay.
It had an internal refueling system put in the belly of the airplane, and then the drogue and hose came out from underneath that. So it was integrated into the airplane, and there was a special panel put in the airplane, and so that was its only mission that it was capable of is tanking. So we put 5 tanks on it, and then the internal payload, so the internal payload of the airplane 16,000, and then 10,000 outside. So you had 26,000 pounds of gas. You couldn't give away all that, but it was a lot more gas than an A7 certainly, or even an A6 with a buddy store on it. The buddy store being basically a tank that you put on the belly of the airplane. You reconfigure the airplane with this belly tank, and it has a drogue in it, but it was a lot more fuel because you didn't want to configure the whole airplane usually when you made it a tanker for just a flight or so.
Yeah.
So it was a great airplane, very reliable because it didn't have any weapon systems, or we didn't send it over the beach, so we didn't have to worry about its raw gear. So it was we had 6 of them in the squadron, and they did yeoman service. They were old airplanes that had sort of outlived their service as bombers. And so we said, well, I know and they were G limited. Most of them were limited to 3 Gs because of all the Gs they had pulled in combat. So they were perfect for 1 G tankers for the most part.
So 6 in your squadron, how did you decide who flew them? Presumably it wasn't nobody was volunteering to go and be the KA-6 crew.
Yeah, not really. They were a bit of a respite from the grind, if you will, of combat, and sometimes it was a welcome relief. But honestly, the heavies in the squadron flew, a lot fewer tankers than the junior officers did. So they were assigned, I would say equitably. Let's say they were assigned equitably, but according to rank. So, among the JAGs in the squadron, they all got the same number of tankers. Among the lieutenants in the squadron, that sort of thing. So, the JLs flew more tankers than the heavies did, but it's just RHIP. Everybody understood that and lived with it. But sometimes it was a little bit of a blessing and a rest for the brain to fly a tanker mission. Although a night tanker, especially the last night tanker, where you might have an airplane that's having trouble getting aboard, and you're the last tanker available because maybe he doesn't have enough gas in our case to get to Da Nang or whatever. They could be hairy, and those tankers were usually assigned to seasoned veterans because they got so hairy. They just could get you had to find to track the guy if he bolted. You had to go down a rendezvous on him, and then have him pass the lead to you, and then you take him up to a safe altitude and tank him, and then try to put him right back, 2 or 3 miles behind the ship, so he didn't have to fly very far to land. It was a very demanding mission. It could be very demanding. So those went to the heavies usually, and bad weather, of course, would exacerbate any problems. So, and sometimes some nights a guy, bless the pilot's heart, he's just having trouble getting aboard. Nobody can explain it. It's like a great athlete that has a bad night. What happened? Nobody can explain it, but he just can't get that dang airplane aboard the ship, and needs gas, and he gets in trouble. And it's kind of one of those. You can make fun of these guys, but you'll be there one night yourself. So it's just one of those rites of passage, I guess. Everybody knows had those problems.
Yeah. What was the limit that you had in the K6 then, at which point you were going to say, we need to get back on the boat now? I mean, there presumably was a number in terms of fuel, pounds of fuel, whatever, where you would just say, okay,
it depended on the weather and some other things, but usually it was around, 3,000, 2,500 pounds of gas, which gave you one pass, maybe two, before they rigged the barricade, which you were going to land regardless.
Okay. So
you didn't like to take it down to 2,500 pounds, but you do that if another airplane's butt was on the line. So those are numbers I recall. I think they're pretty accurate. It's not a lot of gas, but the A6 didn't burn that much gas in the pattern, so it was enough.
Let's go back to A6E then. So you talked about then the radar, so TRAM, I think was the name, wasn't it? What does TRAM stand for?
Target recognition and target recognition and I don't know, system. Yeah, I can't remember. Tell you the truth. How can I forget what TRAM means? It's one of those acronyms you use, but nobody ever says it out loud, and so you just forget what it means.
Someone can post in the comments.
Module, probably target recognition and something module, and attack module.
Did it do anything funky? Did it do automatic target recognition, anything like that? Or was
No, it was all up to the bombardier to find the target. I'm not sure I mentioned it in the first podcast, but that airplane with the FLIR and the great track radar, it could be phenomenal. And I say that because we had an airplane I had my squadron, side number 502, that was a bullseye bomber. Nobody could figure out why it was that way, but I could take it down to the bombing range and get 6 or 7 bullseyes out of 12 bombs. It was amazing. And the Grumman tech reps would pour over it and send specialists down there to figure out why it was that way. And I let them do anything but, basically remove a component. So if you ever remove a component, I'll kill you, because that would probably screw that up. So, but they'd come over and try to figure out. There was like 1 out of 100 airplanes, maybe. I never heard of anybody that had an airplane like that, but I'm sure there were ones. This was an unbelievable airplane. So that's the kind of capability that was resident in that airplane. If it came out just right out of the factory.
What would you have expected typically then? So if you said 6 out of 12 or whatever was what this particular airplane was doing, what would you expect from the others?
Honestly, I could get a CEP, is a circular error probable, of under 15 feet going down there, which means that everything was within 15 feet essentially, or it sort of averaged 15 feet, and that sort of CEP was unheard of in the A-6A. In fact, to get a CEP of 10 feet with 12 bombs was not unheard of. It was just that accurate. Sometimes you just didn't get the velocity correct on the wind right, or a fin bent on the bomb. I mean, so many things can affect the flight of a bomb. A tiny bit of a positive or negative G on the airplane, one wing down, anything. I'm not putting the load on the pilot. I'm just saying it was so sensitive that that it could affect the bomb for a few feet. But our CEP in the A6 was probably over 100, and that was probably generous.
Really?
So,
wow.
So it put it for a Mark 82 500-pound bomb with a CEP of under 50 feet, which I'm sure it was fleet wide. That's a kill for a truck, personnel, anything, just about. Armored personnel carrier, radar van, just about anything. It's at least a mission kill, if not a destruction.
Do you recall, this is a bit of an ask, do you recall when the A-6E entered service?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I know that it might have even, I was just talking to one of my Vietnam buddies the other day, and they left our squadron in 1973 and went to the RAG, and they had A-6Es. They didn't have the FLIR, but they had the A-6E. So they were flying and teaching. I think they were just starting to get there, and the guys were getting up to speed in it, but they were there. And so that was the summer of 1973 when our guys from VA 196 went to the RAG. So 73, 74 timeframe was when they were full blown in the RAG. And I do remember going to VA 65 I was in Pensacola at VD10 as an instructor, and we flew a cross country up there, and VA 65 had A-6Es, and that was probably 1974, 75. So those were in the fleet versus just in the RAG. So that's a general time frame of when they came in. So when I went back to the fleet in 1976 from Pensacola, the A-65 had A-6E with the FLIR.
Okay. So what I was going to ask you was whether or to what degree those new capabilities or the enhanced capability in the radar, but the new capability from the FLIR, whether they changed your tactics, whether they changed the way you employed the airplane.
Well, we still were into the low-level delivery of ordnance into the target area. So it didn't drastically affect the tactics that we expected to use if we went after targets at night against the current. Basically it's still SA2, SA3-ish threat. So it was still a low-level world, and so that's kind of what we trained to.
Did you have then, if you think about geographically, you have in the US Air Force, US Air Force is Europe, stationed here and in West Germany and various other places across Western Europe. And during the Cold War, they would have been, there to make sure that the Russian hordes didn't come across the Fulda Gap and to repel a conventional attack in that style. And so they were going to be flying in a known geographic area, let's say. They could do map study, they could look at what was happening, they could get probably fairly decent intel updates on what was happening to the threat and where the missiles were and
Right.
the bad guys were. As a seagoing aviator then, did you have a similar area of responsibility that you were going to go to if a conventional war kicked off in, with China or North Korea or whatever? Did you have that same sort of luxury?
China, I mean, I tell you what, China wasn't even, to use an A6 term, on our radar, my radar anyway. It was all Soviet Union. It was the Cold War, the depths of the Cold War, and all we talked about, worried about, was Russia. So all of our I think I flew low level in North Africa a couple of times while we were in the Mediterranean. But other than that, those were countries that didn't pose a threat, and really, and so our sort of face was northward toward the USSR. So we had a pretty good size base in Naples where we did some rework of the airplanes. Other than that, and Sigonella was a big base, big Navy base. And we had a base in Suda Bay, pretty good sized base in Suda Bay. Other than that, we didn't fly into many airports, if you want to call them that, bases.
Yeah.
We had a lot of divert plans, bases that we'd use in case of some sort of problem with the airplane or low fuel or whatever that you could divert to. But we didn't have a normal geographical area that we flew in. So every time we flew a low level in Spain or France or Italy primarily, we just got out the charts and reacquainted ourselves with the area and flew the low level. But we didn't have a normal. We traversed the Med from the east to the west.
Okay.
Typically, we'd spend sort of half the cruise in the Western Med and then go to the east, unless there was something bubbling in the Israel, Palestine, Syrian area. But that was our typical cruise, was sort of those two sides of the Med, sort of divided by Italy, if you will.
Okay.
So we didn't have a typical operating area, really.
So what I'm curious to try and understand is what role the A-6E would have played then in a conventional war with the Soviet Union. I mean, you said that so China wasn't on the radar, that's fine. So for just the Soviet Union, if you think about, there's some complexity to the airspace and the arrangements that would have taken precedent in that time. So corridors to go through, deconfliction, ways of getting in and out of airspace without getting shot down by your own side and all that kind of stuff. So there's some complexity there. So were you aware of all of that? Were you told, well, if there's a conflict in Central Europe, we will play a role, this is what we'll be doing, and you need to prepare for that? What did you think war would look like after Vietnam, is perhaps another way of asking the question?
Well, to answer your sort of the first part of the question, yes, we were aware that we would be pulled in to any kind of a ground war, if you will, in Europe on the front or either side of the front, and so we weren't familiar with the territory as the Air Force were, but we were depending on the Air Force, who was familiar and did have all those we call them return to force procedures, where you go in and drop bombs in an enemy country and then come back. And you have certain altitudes, airspeeds, directions, squawks on your IFF, all that stuff. So we were depending on the Air Force to give us all those so that we could head into areas that they were working in, and where they had missile engagement zones or whatever they had, to give us that information so that we could work with it and fly missions in that area. We didn't practice it very often, to be honest with you, but we knew that we knew that they had them and that we would be privy to them. And that for us, it was kind of like, well, we know how to work those things. And when it comes time to it, they'll give them to us and we'll comply with them and we'll fly our missions. So, that was kind of our attitude toward it. But we didn't fly practice missions up there or that sort of thing.
Hey, everybody. Sorry to interrupt your viewing, but if you'd like to support the channel, please do visit 10percenttrue.com and take a look at my store. You can buy polo shirts, t-shirts, stickers, patches, and even my books. And speaking of which, if you're listening to the podcast, this won't make sense, but if you're watching it, then great. The one that's being played in the background at the moment is my new book, F-15E Strike Eagle, Be Afraid of the Dark, Part 1. It's a glorious coffee table book, been professionally laid out and put together. Tells the story of the Strike Eagle from 1984 to 2002. I'm taking pre-orders for it now. If you're interested in it, if you're thinking that might make a nice present for somebody, please do go ahead, visit 10percenttrue.com. Place an order. Thank you.
Can we talk about A6 weapons then? I referenced a few minutes ago precision weapons, precision capability. You talked about the C models that had that. I'm thinking about Beirut. I'm thinking about Desert Storm in 1991, and my very, very limited. I'm already demonstrating my very limited knowledge of Navy operations, but I'm trying to think of pictures of those guys, and I'm thinking I just always see them carrying LDGP, low drag general purpose weapons, unguided munitions, CBU, Rockeye, that kind of stuff. Were you developing the aeroplane into a precision bomber during the 80s and the 90s? What was its sort of trajectory in terms of its ability? So it can find targets in a pinpoint fashion, it can target them in a pinpoint fashion, but can it hit them in a pinpoint fashion? What
Absolutely. It could hit them. I mean, I had the privilege, if you will. We didn't have very many, but I had the privilege of dropping an LGB in at Fallon on a weapons deployment, and it was an absolute dream to drop. I mean, it was just like almost like a video game. It was that easy, I guess you'd call it, if you knew the procedures. If you were well versed and you followed the procedures and you did things in the right order. And the pilot flew the airplane the right way so that it didn't. The airplane went. If you were doing a high altitude delivery, he had to put the airplane where the LGB would be in the basket, we called it, so it could find the target, and that you had your laser on. And that was the other thing I didn't mention about the A-6E is the laser. I mean, talk about precise information for where the target is, not just the tracking radar, but the laser. That's where the doorknob is that you want to hit. And so when you had the laser on the target, or if there was a grunt on the ground that was lasing the target, the reflected energy came back up at you. If the pilot would put the airplane in the place where you could drop the airplane in the basket, you could guide that airplane right to the doorknob. Easy. And as the airplane, the FLIR had a 360 degree operability, so that as you either flew over the target or turned away from it, once you got the airplane in the cone, you could head away from the target out of the threat range, if you will, and keep the FLIR on the target and keep the laser, keep the bomb on the target. And if you were lasing it yourself, and it hit. Very, very seldom did we have a bomb go stupid with the LGB kits we had on the airplanes. As long as you put it in the basket or dropped it under the parameters where it could fly itself to the target and not have to do too steep of a dive or a pull up or that sort of thing. So it was very. If you had the procedures down and you followed the procedures to the letter as far as put the airplane in the basket or lasing the target, it was a pinpoint operation. Absolutely. One bomb.
Did you have, I'm thinking about things like the F-111, so the F-111 D, E, and F models, let's say, which came out after Vietnam. So the D and the E were always I don't think the D actually saw combat, but the E was used as, I think, a pretty much dumb bomb dropper during Desert Storm. I've had Marco McCaffrey come on the channel and talk about that. The F was the tank plinker. You know, famously, the F model would always carry the LGBs and go out and over the Iraqi airfields in Desert Storm, find the bunkers or find the tanks or whatever. It would do this tank plinking. With the A-6E community, did you have units who were specialized in that precision LGB role? Was it widespread?
Well, I think the answer is all of the units were capable of dropping LGBs on anything. A night target, a visual acquisition, if you will, from where you had to roll in and drop the bomb because either using the laser in the airplane or you were being lased. It was being lased by a forward observer. They were all, and I'm not trying to oversell it. I mean, we were all just precision bombers. You tell me how you want me to get that bomb on the target, and I'll do it. If it's a moving target, I'll get it for you. And a case in point, I'll give you a case in point. It's a great story. I'm not trying to give myself credit where credit is due, but at El Centro they had a bombing range and they had a moving target there. It was a little dune buggy. And when they briefed us, the in-brief was, well, I remember the guy. He was used to dealing with single-seat airplanes. So he said, I can hear him. He said, y'all pilots, you can try and hit that dune buggy, but you ain't going to do it. So, forget about it. You can try. And we looked at each other and said, oh, yeah? So I got one of my lieutenant commanders, and we went out after this buggy. And one particular run, we were about 200 feet, and I had the laser on them. I had the flare on them, and everything was beautiful. Now, they turned this thing back and forth, to make it hard to hit. But so the bomb released, and I was chagrined to see the bomb hit next to the dune buggy. But come to find out, the dune buggy stopped. Now, dune buggy is mostly air. It's just a frame, goes over. So come to find out, the fuel for the dune buggy was a gas tank, a cylindrical gas tank mounted on the back horizontally to the ground, parallel to the ground. And the fins of the Mark 76, the little blue bomb, had cut through the top of the tank and gone through the rest of the dune buggy. So it split the tank open, and it had no fuel pressure, so it stopped. So we got the kill. And they were so impressed, they presented the fuel tank to me. They couldn't use it again. They said, you're the first, so here you go. So I kept it around. I was going to use it as a planter someday. I never did, but I carried that around a few moves. But that's how accurate that airplane was. I mean, you give us a target, and we'll either hit it or we'll, come a couple feet from it. So
can we talk about
awesome.
Can we talk about Desert Storm then? Because I know you weren't in combat in Desert Storm, so anything you say is going to be your observations and perhaps talking to friends of yours who were involved in it. But in a similar way to the RAF, I think the RAF with the Tornado went in low. They had a similar philosophy to you: go underneath the radar coverage, use the capabilities of the airplane. They of course had a TF, and you said you didn't, but you've got other methods of making sure you don't hit the ground. With regards,
again, remember, we were coming in Desert Storm. We were coming from the sea, and we were flying over the desert. So for the most part, not saying there were mountains there, but for the most part, there was a lot of level ground there, which kind of like flying up the Red River Delta made it, shall I say, easier, less demanding, I guess, not easier, less demanding to some extent.
So how did the airplane fare doing that then? That was the question I was going to ask. I mean, the RAF lost a few airplanes at low level, I think 5 or 6, and then they transitioned to medium altitude. Did the same thing happen to the A6? Is that a similar story?
It did. We found that it just wasn't paying off flying down at low altitude. a lot of small arms, a lot of SA-7s, things that we didn't necessarily see in Vietnam. So it became obvious, I guess, that we should bump it up a little bit. We didn't have the need to go in there low under the radars. We had much better electronic warfare, raw gear, and that sort of thing. So it meant that we could move the altitudes up some. Yeah.
Can you expand on that at all? The improved EW gear. You talked about the radio homing and warning receiver that you had in the A model. How is it better in the E model?
Well, it gave us better, more precise information as to where the threat was coming from, what the threat was, whether it was tracking or not. And in some instances, we had the range gate pull off model. We had better chaff and flare dispensers, more, we call them units, that we could use. We had the A-6Bs with improved capability against the radars. That was a big thing, and they were in Desert Storm. A lot of times they were kind of closer to the units than they were, even though they might not be necessarily going over the beach. So everything was improved from the Vietnam era. All the gear, all the radar pods on the EA-6B. They had communications jamming that we didn't necessarily have in the EA-6B. They had that in the improved EA-6B or the improved pods. So just everything was better. Everything was either more lethal or better against a lethal threat.
At around this time, then, what is the Air Force thinking about the future of the A6? It's I don't want to say it's getting long in the tooth, because it's all capabilities based, isn't it? If you or effects based, if you can do the job you're being asked to do. But are they eyeing up advanced versions for the future? There's, of course, I think it was during the 90s, wasn't it? Was it the A-12? The
A-12 was the dream of the attack community, the Navy's attack community.
Yeah. So was that?
It wasn't funded. Yeah.
Okay, but was that playing into the conversation where people thinking, was the Navy thinking we're going to have this stealth tactical fighter bomb? I don't know exactly what the A-12 was. I've only ever seen a couple of pictures of it. But
that was the idea. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I will tell you, it's very unfortunate with the A6, because as the airplane aged, if you will, we got some electrical problems in the wings, and those damn generators were giving us problems. And so I'll just say this, that the A6 was taken out of service not because of its capability, but because it had a weak maintenance record or a weak failure record.
Mm-hmm.
Reason I say that, and it's unfortunate, because I was fortunate enough when I had Theodore Roosevelt as a captain, my A6 squadron, VA-36, had basically brand new A6s. They were re-winged with, they call them plastic wings. So any electrical problems they had in the wings were gone. They had new Sunstrand generators that never failed. They were just, almost 100% maintenance free. And the radar, everything was it had integrated GPS that the A-6E didn't have in the beginning. So the advances to the airplane were integrated GPS. The A-6E from VA-36 had the best mean time between failure rate of any airplane in the air wing, and it was the oldest airplane in the air wing. So when I flew when I was a captain of ship, when I needed to get airborne, I flew the A-6 because I knew it was going to get airborne. Mm-hmm. And bless the F-14, it was getting long in the tooth, and it was having a few maintenance problems of its own. So I wasn't 100% sure I was going to get airborne in an F-14. So, but the A-6 was, but what I'm getting around to is the A-6 had a bad rap for too much money and too much mean time between failures and not enough OR, operational ready rate. And that's why it was put on the chopping block. If only the guys that were making the decision to get rid of the A-6 could have been on Theodore Roosevelt with me and seen what that airplane was doing in its latest version, I don't know, but they might have seen, whoa, okay, all the costs for flying this A6 are going to go way down. Let's keep it around. So I don't know. But that airplane, that plastic wing A6, we call it, was a marvel of reliability. I actually, and it also had something which even a lot of A6 guys don't know, is that it actually had command ejection. In the A6, we were on our own as far as ejecting from the airplane. And so that was the first A6 I ever flew with command ejection in it.
Who'd asked for that then?
Who asked for it?
Yeah, was it the BNs or the pilots who wanted it?
I don't think either one. I think everybody thought, that's something we ought to have. Yeah. There have been cases of incapacitated crew members when the other crew member wanted to or had to eject them, and it was very difficult. Not only that, but the crew member, you had to, one case in particular, the bombardier navigator had to tie a piece of parachute cord around the lower ejection handle of the pilot and then kind of lean off to the side and yank the thing so it would eject the guy. It's a well-known ejection of a guy who was kind of passing in and out from being shot. So it was a problem, and they fixed it in the A-6E, in the re-winged A-6E, and it was a good thing to have because either one could eject the other one if they were incapacitated without having to get your arms in the way of maybe taking off when the seat ejected if you weren't fast enough to get out of the way. So.
Was there an F model A6 that existed on paper only?
Just paper, yeah.
What did it look like then? What were you going to be?
I can't even remember. Okay, I'll be honest with you. I'm sorry. I really don't remember.
Okay, that's fair enough. Well,
it may have been the VA-36 A6E with even a few more improvements. I'm really not sure, to be honest with you. It would have looked a lot like, if it didn't have an A6 designation, it would have looked a lot like the A6s that I was flying from Theodore Roosevelt. So.
Okay. Just on that, we'll talk about your command soon. But just on that, when you flew with the line pilots or whatever, were they on their best behavior that the captain was going to be flying with them? Did you do anything tactical?
It's a very, very interesting thing. So you, as the admiral, I flew with the air wing as an admiral, or the captain of the ship. You're going to go fly with a particular squadron. When you walk into the squadron, everything's attention on deck. Captain's here, admiral's here, blah blah blah. And I always said to people, if you got there 15 minutes early or whatever, they'd always rush to get you your first cup of coffee. But you always had to get your second one yourself. Well, why is that? Because they would gradually get used to you being there and get back to what they were doing. Get back to business. And then you could sit like a little fly on the wall and listen to everything that was going on around you and hear the complaints. If I was the captain, I'd hear the complaints about the ship and I'd think, oh, that's interesting. And I'd jot that down. Or if I was the admiral, I'd hear complaints about the battle group and I'd say, oh, that's interesting. And I'd jot that down. So, but the same thing happened in the airplane. You'd get in the airplane and you tell the lieutenant or whoever you're flying with, hey, lieutenant rank is not a thing here. We're both crew members, and there's none of this yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full. You tell me how it is, and don't worry about my rank. And so, but the same thing happened. At first, it was, oh yes sir, no sir, and but and then after a little while, they get used to being there, and you were doing your job, and they were doing their job, and they'd say, oh, not again. The ship's always doing this, and I'd say, really? They'd say, yeah, the ship's always doing so-and-so. And I'd say, well, that's interesting. And I'd write that down. Or, you'd hear a radio call from somebody to somebody else, and you'd think, well, that isn't right. The ship should have picked up on that. That shouldn't be happening. You write that down. So they would loot, once again, but just from the familiarity of having you there, they'd lose that aura of rank, and they just tell you like it is. It was a wonderful thing, both for the battle group command and for the carrier seal. And people would say, well, you're just taking flight time from a junior officer. And I'd say, well, not really. I'm learning a lot about my ship and what's going on. And I fix a lot of things flying with these guys. So it is an interesting evolution to fly with the young guys. And fun. They're great kids.
Is there a flip side to that? in which you end up with too much familiarity?
No, I mean, not for me. I mean, they didn't start calling me Stan. It was either sir or captain, or I had a call sign by then, senator, but they usually said captain or admiral. I mean, easy. And now, and you'd have them in your cabin afterward to debrief, and there was a yes or no, sir, and they tell you what they thought, and then they'd go out to catch a burger and fly the next hop. And so, no, I never found that there was too much familiarity. I didn't spend that much time with them, but I did enjoy being with them, and I did enjoy learning what was going on that I couldn't possibly learn by sitting on the bridge.
I think you'll have to tell me if I misheard this, and I didn't pick up on it when you actually said it on the first interview. But did you say you were enlisted first?
I was. I spent a year enlisted. That's how I got into the Naval Academy.
So you must be extremely rare in the sense that you went from being an enlisted seaman to admiral, or do you call it flag rank or
flag rank admiral?
Flag rank. Well, you're an admiral. So that
I wouldn't say extremely rare. I'd say it's not in the norm. Again, just because the pyramid gets so small that there aren't necessarily a lot of individuals that went from enlisted to flag rank, but a lot of folks that had careers similar to mine that where they made commander or captain that had enlisted time. So it wasn't a phenomenal rarity. But Mike Borda was the first guy who was enlisted to make it to CNO. That was a rarity, of course. But he was the first CNO that wasn't an Naval Academy graduate. So go figure. But it wasn't, it wasn't like, oh my goodness, you're the only person I've ever heard of that did that. Because a lot of guys went at least spent a year at NAPS, which is sort of enlisted oriented, before they went to the Naval Academy. So it wasn't that far out of the norm. I mean, it was out of the norm, but it wasn't that much of a rarity.
Tell us about command then. You were, your first command, as far as I can tell, was through the command of an A6 unit.
Right.
What had you seen in your life up until that point from a command point of view that you wanted to emulate? What had you seen that you wanted to distance yourself from and make sure you weren't that person? What did you carry into that experience?
Well, I wrote a leadership book, and in the book it says you learn, you are part of your experience when you take command, and you have to take what you learned that you didn't want to do and what you learned that you did want to do, and either take them out of the picture or put them in play, and be sure you do that, because you go through life saying, I'm never going to be like that, or that's the way I want to be. And when I gave up the squadron, I said, I'm not sure who I am here today, because part of me is this guy and that guy. A large part of me was my squadron CO during my second combat cruise, who became a dear friend, passed away way too early in life. But he was brave and funny, and as kind of he came across as a real hard ass, but he was very empathetic. Really, he would listen, and he would when he told you to do something, you just did it, or when he implied that you should do something, he hardly ever told you to do something. He implied that you ought to do that, and that's the way I wanted to be. And I didn't want to be like a couple other guys I had known that were, nigglers, and they were always into your business, and they wouldn't let you do what you needed to do, or they were always beating you about the head and shoulders, or that sort of thing. So you take some things. I wanted to have fun in my squadron, and some of that was taken. I call it my first squadron CO, the one I cherished the most, and do the fun things that he did. And I did some of them, and every time I did them, I thanked him for it, And my JOs, I think, appreciated that being a naval officer is too hard if you're not having fun. Period.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't need any more explanation than that. So I wanted to make sure the JOs had fun, and I told them, if you're not, and someone, said this to me, if you're not having fun, it's my fault. You need to tell me about it. And I told the JOs that, and I found one JO that wasn't having fun. He actually told the XO, or the department head, and got back to me, and I sat him down and I figured out why he wasn't having fun, and I fixed it, and he went off having a great time. And so, it was important to take the lessons learned from the people that work for you and really think about them, the night before you walked in your first day of CO, and say, this is the way I want to be. And then be that way. And give the JOs a hard time, but make it fun. Make it hard for them to beat you in a bombing competition. Just all the stuff that makes you, I'm the CO and you're not. And when you're the CO, you can be as good as I am. That's what you're striving for. You want them to want to be like you. Why? Because you're having fun and you're good at what you do, and you let them do your job. So that's what I learned from the people that I worked for. And those are the things that I wanted to be. And I think I did pretty much.
So 2 questions. What was the name of the CO that inspired you so much? And the
His name was Commander Howard Young. Commander Howard Young. And we both moved back to Virginia Beach, and he became a dear friend, and his family, who his daughter used to babysit for my oldest in Whidbey Island when Howie was the XO and CO of the squadron. I became like a member of their family. I mean, and my wife Judy and I are very, very close to his daughter and son, Paige and Greg, and we are just like family to them, and their kids are just like our grandkids. He was just the bravest guy I ever met. But part of it I know from getting to know him afterward. Part of it was what I always espoused was, when you're in command, you never let them see you sweat. You can't show fear because it permeates the organization. So I know just from getting to know Howie later in life that he was afraid just like everybody else, but he never showed it. And so if the skipper's not afraid, I guess I'm not either. Everything's going to be okay. So he was the perfect example of never let him see you sweat. Everything was just, it's just business, they got stuff, we got stuff. It's just another night at the office. Just go out and do your job, and you'll come back and have late night rations with the rest of us. So he was an absolute idol, bravest man I ever knew.
You told the story in part 1 about the skipper saying, for a night surface-to-air missile launch, wait till it illuminates your knee.
That was him. Yeah.
That was him. Wow.
That was him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was funnier than that. I could go on and on. He made it funny.
Yeah.
Because he waited and waited and waited and waited, and you really didn't have to wait that long. He got at the end said, "No, I'm exaggerating. You did it kind of like I said you were supposed to do it." But he just strung you along, but he was just having fun.
No.
He did so many things like that just to make you laugh, and just to know that combat is something you have to go through, but it doesn't have to drag you down. Yeah. You got a bunch of brothers here, everybody's looking after each other. You got to laugh, you got to have a little bit of fun where you can. So I was a hero, and I kind of modeled myself after him, really.
Okay, so I'd like to ask then a little bit about the air carrier battle group part of your career, and I know I'm skipping over a lot of things and a lot of accomplishments in your career in order to get to that, and I don't mean to be disrespectful in doing that, but for me this is a very rare opportunity. I mean, you were in Keflavik, and I know you worked staff jobs and influenced other aspects of naval carrier aviation and so on. But the running of the battle group, the driving of aircraft carriers, those things, I think that's a very rare opportunity for me to have to ask about those. So that's what I wanted to do. You talked in the last episode about spending 3 or so years at school. Did you say it was called the Nuclear Power
Program? Yeah, Nuclear Power School.
What is that, and what do you learn?
Well, it's you spend everyone that goes through the nuclear power program, from ensign to commanders, which is what I was. When you get selected for nuclear power to possibly become an aircraft carrier CO, it's after your aviation command. So I was a 17-year commander, 17 years, yeah, commander when I got picked, and I went to the rest of the guys in my class were ensigns. So it was June, and everybody had cleared out of all the graduations, and they were brand new ensigns. There were 110 ensigns divided into 3 groups down there in Orlando at the Nuclear Power School, and I was in a group of 50-odd ensigns. So it was 50 ensigns and me in this classroom for 6 months, and you're having groups of study of mathematics, physics, chemistry, electrical engineering, and then you get into systems part of it, nuclear power systems and thermodynamics, and all this, everything's that's relevant to knowing how a nuclear power plant works and why it works the way it does. And after 6 months there, you go to what's called prototype, and you go. In my case, I went to New York, where they had the submarine prototypes in Saratoga Springs, and so you spend 6 months up there, where you actually work on a working submarine reactor system, the whole system, and you stand watches, and you actually sit in the seat and start up the reactor. You bump the rods out, and that's actually pretty amazing. And so you do all that stuff. And then from there, you go. I went from there. Those guys go to the fleet. I then went to Crystal City to the head of the Nuclear Propulsion Command, where I spent another 4 or 5 months in what they called the Prospective Commanding Officer Tour. It was given to. We were going to executive officer tours, but that was appropriate for us because we had to know about all the PAO and stuff involved with if you had a spill and all this stuff. So I spent another 4 or 5 months up there. Then I finally got to the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln that we were building in Newport News. So it was an 18 months. 18. Well, I actually spent another month aboard an aircraft carrier, sort of putting all that systems work into your brain in a real aircraft carrier nuclear power plant before I went to my carrier. So that was the schooling involved.
Okay, and so here's the first stupid question: can you explain to the audience probably doesn't need it, but to me, how the nuclear reactor of an aircraft carrier or a submarine works? Is it a simple case that it heats up water and that turns a turbine, which turns the propeller? I mean, what is it?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
My idol, Howie Young, we were at a nuclear aircraft carrier in Vietnam, and he said, these nukes are no big deal. Nuclear power is just a fancy way to heat up the water to make steam for our airplanes.
Okay.
And really, that's what the nuclear power plant does. It heats up this fluid to the point where it's transferred now to a generator, which either transferred to a generator or it's steam that's sent up to the catapults, and the steam either runs a generator or that it's eventually going to run, electrical power, or it runs the engines that turn the screws. So it basically is a core of nuclear uranium that's being held from continuous reactions by neutron absorbing rods. And as you pull the rods out, they absorb less neutrons, and the neutrons fly around and create more and more fissions until you get enough fissions where it becomes self-sustaining. That's what you're looking for, self-sustaining nuclear reaction. And then that's going to create the heat. It heats up basically the water that's going through these pumps. It's going to create the steam that's going to drive the engines and run the catapults. So it's basically that simple. The nuclear part of it is not that simple, but that's it. So you control the amount of energy that's heating the water by pulling out these neutron absorbing rods. If you want more power, you pull out the rods, it produces hotter water faster, and you get more power to the engines, more power to the more steam to the catapults. If you want less power, you put the rods back in, it slows the reaction down. And if you want to shut it down, they call it dropping the rods, and you just drop them in, and it shuts down the reaction because the neutrons can't create enough fission for a self-sustaining reaction.
Is it exceptionally reliable? I mean, I guess
it's exceptionally reliable. I walk on my wooden desk here, my wooden antique desk. We've never had an accident. We've never had we've had a few spills of reactor fluid, but not directly from the reactor. They come from usually dropping a vial with reactor fluid in it or something like that. We've never put any fluid in the water outside the ship. It is extremely reliable. And the procedures are extremely exacting. And Admiral Rickover made sure of that. Ruled that program with an iron fist. And so it's one of the most reliable systems on the planet, if you ask me.
How does it work in from a personnel and an environmental point of view within the ship then? So is this, is it in a vault? Do you have to have a clearance in order to get into that area of the boat?
Well, first of all, there are two parts. In Enterprise had 8 reactors, but now all of our carriers have 2 reactors. So they're kind of divided up. The reactors themselves are in their little hermetically sealed room, and nobody goes in there. And it's steel, lead absorbing on the outside, all that. So nobody goes in there. And the reactor room is kind of small. Then when all that hot fluid gets out, that's where the pumps are too, by the way, that pump the water into the reactor, through the reactor and back out, and then through the heat transfer areas. So that's a small area that nobody goes into. So, but the area around that is fairly restricted. You have to have a clearance to get in there. You have to have what they call a dosimeter. It measures any gamma ray reaction to, you know about those. It's measured every month. And then there are the engine rooms, if you want to call them. That's where all the auxiliary stuff, the boilers and the not the boilers, but the engines and the generators and all that other stuff. You have to wear a dosimeter in there too, because there's a possibility of a little bit of contamination getting into the water that goes through those things. But it's absolutely minimal, if any. It's almost not measurable. And we have said for years that you can get more gamma rays in your body from flying across country a couple of times at 40,000 feet than you can from spending 6 months as a sailor running a nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely true. So they're very, very safe. And they are sort of cordoned off for, needing lollygaggers down there. You just need people that have a specific purpose and have a dosimeter on that are there to do whatever their business is and then go their merry way. So not many people get to go down there, basically.
You described the safety of the systems, and so this question I'm going to ask now might sound even more ridiculous. But why do you, as the captain of the ship, need to know so much? Why do you have to go to 6 months worth of school? Can you not have an engineering officer under your command or a nuclear engineering officer who has all that knowledge?
It's a great question, and thank you for asking it. No, I'm serious, because that's been the knock on what a waste of time to send this guy who's going to be the captain aircraft carrier in nuclear power school. He doesn't have to know all that stuff. Why does he have to know all that stuff? Well, I'll tell you why. First of all, when you're the captain, there are certain people in the reactor department, and that is run by a lifetime surface nuclear warfare officer. He went through the same training I did at nuclear power school, and he's been on and off. Either in those days we had nuclear cruisers, so he spent his whole career on nuclear cruisers or aircraft carriers, and occasionally on a regular cruiser, maybe to get his combat or his quals in certain areas. But he's a surface warfare officer who's had command of a ship, a non-nuclear ship, in this case a destroyer, and he comes there as a captain to run the nuclear power plant, the plants, and that whole department. So he can qualify a lot of people in the department. There are certain people in those departments that the captain has to qualify. Now, I ask you, do you want to be on a ship where the captain is qualifying people just because the reactor officer says the guy's good to go? Yeah. Not me. That's not the way. And when I qualify someone, I want to be able to ask them smart questions, not just questions that are fed to me. I want to be able to ask follow-on questions to test their knowledge and to see what they're really thinking. I want to be able to do that, not just sit there as a potted plant while the reactor officer qualifies this guy. So that's number one. If you really want to qualify someone, you have to know what the heck they're doing and how the plant works. The other one is very interesting, maybe even more important or equally important. So you sit up there on the bridge and you got two very important people working for you, the reactor officer and the guy who runs the control tower, the air officer, the air boss. So in my case, I've been in nuclear power training and I've been to design school, and I know pretty much how that plant works. And so I don't know it as well as the reactor officer does, but I know. And the other thing about it is, in my particular case, I've been the guy in the tower. That's where they plucked me out of my air boss tour to send me to nuclear power school after squadron command. So I've been in the tower, and I've been essentially to reactor power school. So when there's an argument's not right. When there's a disagreement between the reactor officer and the air boss about how we should do something, how fast we should go, what you would do, if you're not qualified as in the reactor, if you're just taking reactor officers, and he'll always be conservative, believe me.
Yeah.
That's what he's paid to be. Then you're not doing justice to the air officer and the situation. So when they come to you, you can say, well, okay, the reactor officer, this is what I want to do. And you say, air boss, what do you want to do? And he tells you what you want to do. And you can say, oh, look, reactor officer, we could do this in naval reactors. It's not going to be upset. And we're not going to be this. It's not what you'd like to do, but we could do it, right? Well, yes, sir. Okay, air boss, we could do this, right? I know it's not what you had in mind, but there's nothing unsafe about it, and we can do it, right? Well, yes, sir. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. And they all look like, well, okay. Both guys go away happy, and you go away knowing that you made the decision based on knowledge, not just by one input or the other. So I found that, I knew before I got to the carrier it would be that way, but it was brought home to me a couple of times. I had such great people working for me, reactor officer and air boss, but sometimes you just couldn't agree, and they couldn't see the other person's point. Why? That's not their job. So you got to be Solomon. You got to say, I don't want to split this baby. Let's have you can have your part, and you can have your part, and you can okay, all right, we can do that. And that boy, that just made my day. But it's hard to tell people that. But it's worth every minute I spend at Nuke Power School and in prototype. to be able to make those decisions, important decisions between the reactor officer when there's just non-agreement on a way forward between those two really capable, really smart, really dedicated individuals. I'm all for nuclear power school for senior officers.
So would it be simple things like you kind of alluded to, so sailing the ship at a certain speed to allow recovery during a certain window? Would it be that kind of example that you're sort of alluding to?
Well, it might be something like that. Like the air boss says, well, in order to get where we're going, we need to do, say, I'll just pick it up, 30 knots. And you say, okay. And he says, in order to be there, we need to do 30 knots so I can fly 2 days along the way, because that'll slow us down, right? So the reactor says, oh, boss, Captain, we can't fly 30 knots. We're supposed to do this and that. That'll elevate our average temperature, our TAV, to this and that. And naval reactors get all upset. So you say, well, okay, let's, air boss, what if we fly this way instead of that way? What if we fly shorter cycles and we get as many traps for the air wing, which is what you're looking for? You're looking for experience in night traps, not necessarily flight time. And then we can go a little slower, and the reactor officer's happier because we're not burning as much fuel. I mean, you're talking about a 25-year fuel life, but it's still important. And they kind of go, yeah, I can live with that. The reactor says, yeah, I can live with 23 knots instead of 30. And the boss says, yeah, I think the air wing commander could live with not as many flight hours, but maybe even more traps, because we'll do it this way. So, okay, good. Let's do it then. They both walk away happy. So that's the kind of thing.
Can you help me understand the structure from a command point of view then of a carrier battle group? So I've made the assumption that if you're the captain of the aircraft carrier, you're in charge of the carrier battle group. Is that true, or does that mean
No.
Okay, so the Admiral is in charge of the carrier battle group.
Admiral is in charge of the battle group, and he writes fitness reports and gives commands to everyone, every captain in the battle group. And
is he stationed on the aircraft carrier? Is that
usually?
Okay.
Usually he is the embarked flag in the carrier. Yes, that's where his biggest command center is. He's capable of. That's probably where the epicenter of the battle is going to be, if you will. So that's generally where he hangs his hat. Except for, if you're sending a surface action group someplace, he might embark in a cruiser or something because of certain things that are going to go on there, certain high-level things that are going to be going on with a NATO ally or something. But okay. Yeah, generally he's embarked in the carrier. Yeah.
Let's just talk about the captain level stuff first before we move up to the admiral level stuff. But so you talked about knowledge, the importance of having it. You've done the 6-month school. You've been an air boss, or you were midway through your air boss tour. Yeah. So you're acquiring this knowledge. How much knowledge do you have to have about actually the aircraft carrier itself? Just simple things like steering it, like taking it to a port, taking it through the Suez Canal. Where does that knowledge come from? Where's the school for that stuff?
Funny you should ask that. A lot of it comes from my previous command of a 600-foot amphibious ship. That's where I got cut. That's the reason you do that. That's the reason you're a captain for 18 months or 2 years of that oiler or supply ship, or in my case, an LPD amphibious ship. That's the reason you do it, so that you cut your teeth basically on replenishment alongside, on going in and out of port, on all the things you mentioned. You cut your teeth on when I was the CEO of USS Ponce. That was my job. And so when you get to the carrier, and this is so all this sort of keeps. What about steering? Well, after steering, where they call the place where the rudders actually come up in, and you can see them turning and everything, and that's where you take command of the rudders. If you have a steering problem between the bridge and the rudder, you actually give commands to the people in after steering to turn the rudders. There's an after steering in Ponce, and I spend time down there. Just about everything in Theodore Roosevelt was aboard Ponce, and I had already cut my teeth through drills and inspections and all that stuff in Ponce. So when I got there, it was bigger, more complex, but kind of the same. So the decisions were bigger in terms of what you're driving around and what you're taking into port and your responsibilities, but they're relatively the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So at this point, then, do you feel like an aviator still, or do you feel like a sailor?
Yeah, great
I mean,
question.
you're in the Navy, so maybe.
Yeah, but I referred to myself in command of Ponce, because I had an aviation unit in Ponce of helicopters, and I flew with the helicopter guys once a week when we were off Liberia. So I called myself a shoeviator. So I was an aviator and a black shoe. I mean, when you're in command of a black shoe ship, you're doing black shoe stuff. Unless I was back flying, and then I was an aviator. So I had all this aviation experience, and it applied to the carrier too. There I am driving the ship, but I'm also getting flying off of my own ship, getting trapped on my own ship. So I told people I'm a shoeviator. I do both. I almost wore one black shoe and one brown. I didn't quite go that far, but because the thing is, the black shoes really do wear black shoes, and the aviators really do wear brown shoes.
What are the challenges then, from a practical point of view, day to day, being the captain of an aircraft carrier?
The challenge is trying to keep aware of everything that's going on the ship, and trying to keep your fingers on the pulse of everything. You can't. Well, you can, not everything. Everything important. You cannot keep your finger on the pulse. Everything in the ship. But you got to decide at the beginning of the day what's important today. Flight operations, okay. Underway replenishment, okay. Reactor drills, maybe, okay. That's important. Work on a catapult, okay. That's important. Various things throughout the ship that you get from your department and saying, this is what's going on in my department, skipper, so you know, and you kind of circle, you get about 10 reports there, and you look through them and go, ooh, boy, that's something I need to keep my eye on. And so you ask that department head to, I'm not trying to do your job, and I'm not nitpicking you, but it's kind of trust but verify. Give me hourly reports on that, or whatever it is. But you got to decide at the beginning of the day what's important, because you can't follow everything. And then you just trust those phenomenal sailors, officers and men, in my case, men. I didn't have any women aboard, so I say that not pejoratively, but just they were officers and men that were running that ship to the best of their ability, and hope that they didn't screw it up. If you know what I mean, because mistakes happen. So you keep your finger on the important things and get reports from them, and then of course then you got to handle the up jump the devil things. Oh man, I wasn't expecting that, and that takes your eyes off the ball a little bit. But it might take your eye off flight ops, where you'd like to sit there in your chair and observe everything that's going on. So you put the XO in your chair and say, XO, you got it. I got this to deal with now. Whatever it is. So you got these people to back you up. You got the things that you have to do. I knew guys that would not leave the captain's chair during flight operations, or practically at all, the entire time they were in command. And I wasn't going to do that, especially when we weren't flying. I mean, when we're replenishing alongside, when we're flying, I shouldn't be on the bridge. When we're passing through the Suez Canal or the Straits of wherever the straits are, then I should be on the bridge. That's my post. But other than that, I tried to get around the ship. I tried to go to cake cuttings and talk to the crew in various places and pop into places where they wouldn't expect the captain to pop into. To make sure that I knew that they were there, and hear what they had to say. And when you're walking around the ship, and then I'll get back over you, but when you walk around the ship and you stop a sailor and ask him what's going on, sometimes they complain about one of your policies. Say, well, Captain, I'd be a lot happier if it wasn't for your policy of so-and-so. You go, oh, my policy of so-and-so. That's interesting. That one, who was it that told us the policy? Well, Chief so-and-so told me. Okay. So you go back and you get the XO and the XO. Chase down Chief so-and-so and find out where my policy came from. and fix it, please. Don't tell them it came from Seaman Ravenel, but tell them I heard it through the grapevine. And that ain't the captain's policy. And I want him to explain to his men that's not the captain's policy. And I'm very sorry if I came across telling you that it was the captain's policy, because it's not. Those are the things you learn just from talking to these kids.
That's brilliant.
They just drop their guard when they talk. Some of them, you're the captain. That doesn't mean they can't talk to you like I got something to say to you, Captain. Okay, let's hear it.
Yeah.
And usually it's something you really want to hear. So anyway, I tried to get around the ship, as much as I could.
On that note,
that's why I never had, one of the reasons I never had the guy that cooked my meals for me down in my mess, which I paid for, by the way. I told him never make dessert for me, because I go around the ship and people always offer me cookies. I'm always cutting a cake. I'm always, and I can't say no to that stuff. I don't eat very much, but I can't come up here and then eat a dessert. I can. No dessert's for you. I said, if you want to make dessert for you and the other guy that's running my mess, you feel free to do it, but none for me. Yes, sir.
So tell me about the practicalities of doing that, then going to places where you maybe are not expected to appear. I saw a video once where I think they said that there's a code system on the walls to tell you what floor you're on and how to get to the next floor or whatever.
Absolutely.
But so you've got all this stuff, physics and chemistry and nuclear stuff and aviator stuff and seafaring stuff crammed into your brain. Yeah. Do you also have a layout of the ship in your brain? I mean, can you...
Absolutely.
Do you really?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Which passages go all the way forward and aft, which ones? Oh, absolutely. You got this.
You get that
thing in your brain. I mean, it's not everything, obviously. But
that's from study, or that's just from having spent time on the boat?
Some from study and some from just being around the ship.
Okay.
Just walking around the ship. And so, honest God, so that is, darn, I didn't know that was there. It's my ship, but I guarantee you, I didn't get into every space on my ship. I tried, but there's no way.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily know where everything was. I tried, but sometimes you walk around and go, "Oh, that's where that is." I'll be darned,
Yeah.
And so you pop in there and go, "Hey, how you guys doing?" And they look at you like, "Wow, I didn't expect the captain to walk in." It was great fun. And I'll tell you a story about people not expecting you. This is from my time as the XO of the ship. So I was the XO, and I lived over in Newport News where we were building the ship. And so it was late at night, about 11 o'clock at night, and I decided I had nothing to do. I was going to go over the ship and see what was going on. You got to go. Sometimes you got to go over the weekends and, whatever. So about 11 o'clock, I went over the ship and went down the reactor spaces, and it was a kind of a construction space. The guy should have had hard hats on, right? And safety glasses. So I walk in there, and as soon as they see me, I see these guys scurrying around, putting their hard hats and safety glasses. So I will go up to him, and I say, so how are we doing, guys? Oh, fine, sir. Well, give me a report on what's going on down here. I heard we were doing this tonight or something. Yes, sir, and blah, 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 blah. So I think for a minute they thought they got away with it. They got away with it. So I said, okay, great. Good to see you guys. I'm going after whatever I'm going to do. I said, by the way, if I ever come down here again and you're not wearing your safety equipment, you're all going on report. I'm serious. We don't mess around with safety equipment. This is ridiculous. It's for your own good. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I said, okay. Yeah, and I said, you never know when I'm going down here. I just live a mile away. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I started to walk away. I turned my back to him, and one of the guy goes, he says, "Hey, XO." Oh, I know. They said, why did you come down here? And I said, well, I'm not married, and so I didn't have a warm body to crawl in next to, and I didn't have a dog to kick, so I came down here to see you guys. Okay. So I started to walk away, and they said, "Hey, XO." I said, "Yes." They said, "Can we buy you a dog?" So, little sailor humor there. I said, no, but I'll see you guys later. True story. That's
awesome.
sailors, they're just wonderful people. Can I buy you a dog?
Tell me about, so I've often wondered about life on the ship, not from an aviator's point of view, because you guys get to go out on deck, you get to go and fly, you get to go and see the sun when it's overcast and all those sort of things. But were there trades on the aircraft carrier that you felt for because they were in the bowels of the ship all the time?
Absolutely.
What were those trades? What
the engineers,
were the tough
the guys
ones?
who worked down in the engineering spaces.
Okay.
They worked
engines and
on the. So the main deck of the aircraft carriers is the deck of the hangar bay. That's first deck. So and some guys are working on the 6th or 7th deck. They work all day down there, and then they come up to maybe the 2nd deck where their berthing was, and they go to sleep. And then they'd go still on the 2nd deck. They'd go to the mess hall, and then they'd go to a little recreation area in the berthing area, and then they'd go watch some television, and then they'd go to sleep, and then they'd get up, and they'd go down to the 7th deck again. And they'd do this for months. Yeah. And I did feel for those guys. There wasn't much I could do about it. I always encouraged people when we were not flying to check through hangar deck control and see if they could come up on deck to get some fresh air and see the sun. But, or at least to come up on the hangar bay so you could look out through the hangar bay doors, the elevators, that opened up the elevators, so they could see the ocean and the air, smell the air and stuff. But I did feel for them. Yeah. There were guys that didn't see the sun for long periods of time.
Yeah. There's probably a bunch of submariners listening to. Well, there won't be any submariners listening to this.
Well, they don't care. Yeah, they have no sympathy for that.
What are you moaning about?
What are you crying about?
What about the aviation side of things then, from a captain's point of view? Are you given some orders to take the ship somewhere and do some flying, or are you just told take the boat to the Med, whatever, be prepared to go to Sigonella or whatever in 3 weeks' time and just rack up a certain number of hours or a certain number of traps? Well, how does it work? What are you actually told to do?
Well, like on the trip over there, it was my choice whether to fly or not. Sometimes we get near the Azores, and so we had a relief bingo field, but it was purely my choice. And the Admiral would never. He might suggest, but he'd never tell me to fly if I said I didn't want to, because it's purely the CAG and I, the Air Wing Commander, and I talking it over, and what should we do, and no, we can wait, or whatever it was. Then when we got in the Mediterranean, usually the life was, well, not on my cruise, but usually the life was, well, what's our first exercise? How much flying are we going to do? What flying do we need to do before we get there? So that was kind of between me and the Air Wing Commander, the choice, and the Battle Wing Commander didn't enter into that. He wanted to know, he wanted us to be ready to fly, what we're going to fly in the exercise, and do it right, So he expected we would do the proper training along the way and be ready to go. Then there's the opposite end of that is, in my cruise, we headed straight to the Med, and we headed right for the Adriatic Sea, because we were going to, Bosnia was hot and heavy, and we were going to institute a no-fly zone. So the CAG, the Air Wing Commander, and I decided how much flying to do, how much, in conjunction with when we needed to be there to start instituting a no-fly zone and that sort of thing. Work with the Allies first, get together, institute a no-fly zone. So it's a big puzzle, and the Admiral certainly had his inputs, but it was kind of between CAG and myself as to how much, what we did with the ship so we could fly, and so we had a good divert base. If airplane had a problem, we get the day and night hours, so everybody would be day and night current when we pulled in the Adriatic, and we had to start, doing flight ops where we wouldn't necessarily know where they'd start and stop. If that paints the picture for you, I hope it does. But there were times when it was purely up to my discretion with the Air Wing Commander, and purely what we needed to do because the admiral expected us to be ready to go during a certain exercise or to institute a no-fly zone, something like that.
Okay. So was this for deny flight?
It was deny flight, yes.
Deny flight. Okay. And
we put it together and ran it for about 6 months. By the way, my crew called it because we couldn't get off station there until for 90 days until an amphib came into the Adriatic that had the capability to rescue a down flyer.
Right.
We couldn't leave. So instead of calling it, they called it Be No Station. Be no liberty, be no fun, be no. So we couldn't leave. We were literally stuck there, and we had 2 days where we could serve beer to the crew after 45 days.
Right.
And when the CNO Admiral Border came aboard, my command master thought we were going to be in big trouble because one of the sailors called him Admiral Beer Day. Well, Borda thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. He was that kind of guy. So, interesting guy. So anyway, I forget what your question was now. I'm sorry. But yes, we started deny flight. And something very interesting, and this is this is not anti-Air Force. This is the power of having a platform at sea that arrives on station and is ready to conduct combat operations. Okay? That was us.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first, I don't know, I forget how long it was, 30 days or so, the Air Force was arriving and getting up to speed with combat operations, and their ordnance was arriving in Aviano. It wasn't the Air Force. I mean, and believe me, this isn't anti-Air Force. It's just the name is. It's going to any base that you haven't been residing, where you haven't been residing, and flying combat operations. And so for 3.5 weeks, we're the only game in town that could do deny flight and fly a strike if we needed to. So we were the game when we pulled in there. We were it. Now, in deference to our allies, the French had a carrier there and the Brits had a carrier there, and they were very professional. And we worked as a great team doing deny flight. So I say we're the only game in town, but they were the same way. They were ready on arrival. That's what we call it. Ready on arrival. They were ready on arrival too, with bombs and flight crews ready to go, and they didn't need, permission. We had to work it out with the Italians whether we could launch combat missions out of Aviano.
Yeah.
So it goes to the highest of the diplomatic levels, not just the bombs and flights. So being ready on arrival the onus is on you till the other guys get up to speed. So the Brits and the French were ready on arrival as well. They were great partners. Great partners.
I
enjoyed working with them.
This might stand be a good juncture to ask you then about the relationship and the division of responsibilities between the admiral then and the captain. So you talked about how you decide whether or not you fly. You and the CAG figure out your plan to get everybody ready at the point at which you need to be flying combat ops. What is the admiral doing? What does he do?
The admiral's planning the whole thing. I mean, he's talking to the State Department about using Aviano as a divert field, perhaps, or he's talking to the Joint Chiefs of Staff about, well, what targets can we strike? What are the rules of engagement? All that stuff. He's putting the whole puzzle together, and we're doing our piece of it. He's also directing the rest of the battle group. We've got a commander who's in charge of sort of the air picture there aboard the cruiser. So he's Alpha Whiskey. So he's talking to Alpha Whiskey about what's his setup? Where does he go? What does he do? What are his responsibilities? He's got a maritime component commander. He's got all these component commanders within the battle group working for him, and so he's coordinating all of that. In addition to all the off-ship stuff, all the diplomatic and Joint Chiefs stuff, he talks to the Joint Chiefs. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
That wasn't my job. Another story about him talking to the Joint Chiefs. We later on in my cruise, we'd left the Adriatic and we're en route to port, and just before we crossed the toe of Italy, he came to me. We were headed to Marseille, and he said, "Stan, turn the ship around." I said, "Yes, sir. Are you going to give me a clue as to what's going on?" He said, "Well, I can't tell you exactly what's going on, but I want you to turn the ship around. We're not going to Marseille. I want you to make 30 knots to the Suez, and we're going through the Suez." Okay. I said, "Well, I do have one issue, and we're going into port, so I had maintenance being done on one of my engines. So I was trailing. We call it trailing the screw. It was just turning there. The water was just making it go around." I said, "I'm trailing the screw on one of the engines, so I only got 3 engines right now. And you want me to make 30 knots?" And he said, he's a great friend, and I hope he wouldn't be offended by this if he heard it. But he said, "Well, geez, I just told the Joint Chiefs you could make 30. What can you give me?" I said, "I could probably give you 29.9. And he looked at me and he said, "Not funny." I said, "Yeah, I know, but I took my shot. I had it." And he kind of laughed. He said, "Yeah." And I said, "No, I can give you 30 knots. But if you hear us slowing down, it's because I'm putting the engine back in, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Okay." But there he was talking to the Joint Chiefs, and they were telling him, "Hey, you make 30 knots to the Red Sea. We'll tell you later what your orders are." So
Wow.
that was Admiral J. Johnson. Could not have had a fine battle group commander than that.
You mentioned, I'm beginning to run out of time again. I feel like this should have been at least another hour, but you mentioned the Red Sea. We talked before we hit record. There's a question I have to ask you, actually. I just need to get this in before I forget, and then we're going to talk about Red Sea and Houthis and the modern day threat. I know that there are so many things that we could talk about, but I am time bound. So the one question that people think, why are you asking this question? But I want to know about your cabin. So on the aircraft carrier, so the Admiral's on the aircraft carrier. Does he have a bigger cabin than the captain? Whose cabin is better?
Well, that's not a loaded question, but it's an interesting question, because the Admiral's cabin was very nice. It may have been a little bigger. I don't know what the square footage was, but I had 2 cabins, and he only had 1. So there you go. Yeah, I had a cabin that was directly behind the bridge.
Yeah.
That was my sea cabin, and that's where I slept every night at sea. Because if I was needed on the bridge, I could run out there in my underwear and figure out what was going on. Sometimes literally, not figuratively, but the other one was, so that was on the 07 level. The other one was on the 03 level, or 08 level. The other was on the 03 level. And 02 level. And so it was quite a ways down. But that was a big, spacious cabin, and I could entertain in there if we had VIPs aboard, and I could sleep in there and enjoy it if we were in port. And I had a study off of the in-port cabin where I could, across the hall, the passageways, my captain's secretary, my admin guy, right arm admin guy. And so he'd either bring my paperwork in there or up to the bridge when I was on the bridge. But anyway, my cabin was really, really finely appointed with Theodore Roosevelt relics, if you will. Things that came from the ship when they were making it. Things that, like, there was a pennant there from the original Theodore Roosevelt, USS Theodore Roosevelt, was a submarine, and all this stuff that it wasn't just aviation and ship stuff. It was Theodore Roosevelt stuff. I mean, the real thing.
Wow.
And the Admiral's cabin wasn't quite pointed that way. So mine was pointed more personally toward Theodore Roosevelt. So I mean, I like mine better. But
So tell us a bit about the threat to carrier battle groups then, and modern day asymmetric warfare. So I just did reference the Red Sea and the situation, the Houthis firing very cheap drones at shipping, and there has been developments in weaponry in China and Russia where there's hypersonic missiles that can potentially strike a carrier battle group, an aircraft carrier, sink an aircraft carrier, and offer very little warning that they're on their way to do that. So I guess if you think about the traditional Cold War threat of, I don't know, bears and badgers flying along and dropping their big fat RCS cruise missiles and then flying along at sea top level, and you have to shoot them down with the phalanx and all that kind of stuff. Is that still the threat? Is the threat now different? What do you think has changed between when you were the captain or the admiral of a carrier battle group and now? You're out of the service and you're just looking at it as an outsider like everybody else.
Well, that's absolutely the threat that you described. Drones, I'm not going to say the threat, but we have, there are a number of ships in the battle group which form an air defense bubble around the carrier and for themselves and for the other ships in the carrier that aren't quite anywhere equipped. So finding an incoming missile with the Aegis radars and the new radars that are going aboard carriers and now aboard the some of the DDGs, the SX band combination, finding the incoming missiles is not as difficult as it used to be. Plus, you got the E2 with an absolutely stunning radar. A-6B up there with early warning stuff, satellites, you name it, all kinds of early warning. So for a carrier at sea, the threat of missiles is real, but it's also based on a threat condition. So it's not as if it's not like being in the Red Sea with the Houthis throwing everything but the kitchen sink at you and 24 hours a day. So if you're in the middle of the Mediterranean or even in the Red Sea, you're not thinking about all of that stuff. You're thinking about drones and you're thinking about anti-ship missiles. But there are protocols for those. And they've worked pretty well so far as for ships of self-defense. And so, but depending where you are, as opposed to surface to ship missiles, the drones are the threat. There's no question about it, because they can come from anywhere, not just Yemen, if you will. That's the nexus of where you expect missiles to come from. Drones can come from anywhere. So it's a very real, very difficult threat. And the days are getting shorter for when we have real-time laser and or microwave weapons aboard the ship, where we can take these out very easily and not expend a $500,000 missile on a $50 drone. Yeah. But yeah, the threats they're tough. Yeah. They're tough. Not like the old days.
When you were in then, were you seeing the development? Net-centric warfare was a thing that I think came along in the 90s. The ability, it obviously existed before then. The ability to have a network over which you could transmit information existed, but net-centric warfare as a thing, I think, was a 90s thing. And I understand the Chinese now have really taken that to the next level. The ability to have multiple sensors across effectively a web that then contribute to anywhere, really. So anyone can become the shooter. You could have a carrier battle group, and one of the ships, even though the sensor data is coming from an aeroplane, one of the ships could engage a target using that data. Were you guys doing the same thing through the 90s then? We
were doing some of that. It was on the cutting edge, yes. Okay. But in the 90s, it was cutting edge. It was more Link 16 oriented and some other stuff. But we didn't have the capability to have an F-18 out at 100 miles and paint something and have that transferred back to the ship and have them shoot an SA-6 at it. We didn't have that capability, but we do now. You know, talk a lot about the Chinese, and they don't talk about our capabilities, which is fine with me because I know what they are. I think you know what they are. I strongly suspect, like saying, "Did you carry nuclear weapons?" Well, I can either confirm or deny that we have nuclear weapons aboard. Was our mantra when we had them. But I say I strongly suspect that the U.S. has all the capabilities that you just mentioned, and the Chinese have, or are telling us they have, and we do know how to use them. Yeah. They were just coming to the fore, just like simulations were coming to the fore when I was a battle group commander, being able to use simulated airplanes in a battle group problem, or being able to be aboard ship in Port Norfolk and play in the problem as a part of the battle group that's at sea. So all that simulation has led to incredible training and has actually led to, wow, if we can do that, why can't we make this part of the weapons system, part of net-centric warfare? So, but it just been an explosion in that, which is all good.
I guess the question I was going to ask you around that was, from a commander's point of view, what do you think that does to the decision-making process or the decision-making tree? Because my understanding is that this stuff requires massive computational power. I think AI now, everyone's talking about AI. It's cliche to talk about it, but AI is a component of that because you need it to be able to very rapidly assess data, and using a model that has been learned, make some deductions and make some recommendations and put together a picture that it then presents to you. Do you think that the sort of distributed nature then of, let's say, the next big conflict, the way in which a battle group would operate and protect itself from an attack, do you think that means that as a commander you're less empowered because actually you're...
No, I don't think so, because as the flag officer, you've given the power, you've given the ability to pull the trigger to many, many people in the battle group. And so you and the admiral's the one who's in charge of, if you will, the rules of engagement for the battle group, which is, one level below the rules of engagement for the United States Navy, which is one level below, blah, blah. So, so he's the one that's writing the ROE, so that the people that are empowered can still make the decisions based on the information they're getting, without having to, call back to the admiral and say, "Hey, can we shoot this guy?" If we get to that, then we're done for, because, the admiral's not going to be able to make those decisions. So we've already distributed that in the battle group to the air warfare commander, to the E2, to the whoever it is, with the power to order weapons free on whoever or whatever it is. And so I don't think that's going to the ability of AI to tear away some of the extraneous data and allow us to more clearly see what the real picture is and what needs to be done, I think is all good. It's not going to take anybody. We're not going to let HAL, the 2000 computer, pull any triggers in the near term.
Yep.
But we are going to allow HAL to give us clarity on and strip away the crap that doesn't need to be considered, and allow us to make decisions in a clearer fashion, more in line with the rules of engagement, more in line with critical pull of the trigger, timelines, that sort of thing. So if HAL can just, the biggest problem I had when I was a commander carrier before was in exercises was positive hostile identification. How do you positively ID someone as hostile so you can tell somebody to pull the trigger and give them permission, weapons free? That was a tremendous problem. And if because they'd misidentify airplanes, they'd misidentify ships, they wouldn't have the proper area or airfield that it took off from, or the port that it left, or whatever. But if HAL AI can help us sort through all that and get a PHID that's really positive, that everybody can feel good about, then more power to AI, more power to hell.
Final couple of questions then, Stan. When you look across the length and breadth of your career, then from being, from enlisting in order to get into the Navy, and then being a combat aviator in Vietnam, and seeing the evolution of the A-6, and then being in command of a very sophisticated carrier battle group, do you feel like you have sort of lived through the golden age of being a naval combat aviator? I mean, so all this new technology, AI, distributed networks, all that kind of stuff. I mean, are you sort of grateful that you were there at those times, or is there a part of you that thinks, actually, I wouldn't mind getting in now and starting it all over again and seeing where this goes?
No, I'm very grateful. I lived through that. There was so much. I was empowered. I had so much responsibility, and I was empowered to make so many decisions that, you had to rely on your people to help you make, and then go forward with them. I just think, use the term golden era. It was a golden era for me to go from what we had as what I had as a lieutenant junior grade, my first cruise in Vietnam, to what I had at my disposal, if you will, as a battle group commander, training battle group commanders. It was a golden era for me. It was a time of great. It was a learning experience for me. It was infinitely satisfying. I felt like there are so few people in the world who really can feel they made a difference in the world at certain times, at certain inflection points. I mean, I feel like I made a difference in Vietnam when we took the North Vietnamese down. Finally, I feel like I made a difference when we put up deny flight. I mean, I feel like I've made a difference in a couple of places in the world that needed. And it's a great feeling. It's a fantastic feeling to have been there and done that, and look back at it and be able to say I dodged a few bullets. That's for sure. Yeah. Both real and hypothetical, but certainly dodged my share of bullets. Yeah. And the guys today and gals today are doing the dodging bullets, maybe even faster than I did. And so, more power to them. But I was there when it was a lot of fun. It was really hard. I had more responsibility than I could ever have dreamed of. I had the best people in the world working for me. What could you want?
So this is the final question then. So what are you doing in retirement? How do you go from having all of that to being maybe even defined by that, to it not being there anymore?
Well, I kind of hope I am defined by my contribution in the Navy. I mean, I also want to be a great father and a great husband and a great grandfather, and have friends, especially my combat buddies that are dear to me as brothers. But when someone says, "What did he do?" Well, he did this and that and the other thing, and you kind of go, "Oh, well, that's interesting." A lot of people never seen an aircraft carrier, let alone commanded one, and so I feel if someone defines me as a guy who had a battle group and a carrier, then so be it, because I know everything that went along with it, and I know there are a lot. I mean, bless their hearts, there are a lot of aviators that wish they'd been in my shoes, and to be there at an inflection point in history where you can say, "Hey, I was there. I was there when we did that, and we did it with my help." So it's a great feeling. And if that's how they define me, well, it could be worse.
But what do you do now, though? I mean, because that's a
well, I spent some time in industry, which was all right. But nowadays, I did write a book, and so I.
What's the name of your book?
Pardon me?
What's the name of your book?
It's called a 5-Star Leadership Handbook. It's available on Amazon. I wrote it in conjunction with the former Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, Jim Hurt, who was my command Master Chief on Theodore Roosevelt. It's about leadership, as you might imagine. So I wrote a book, and with the help of my editor-in-chief wife and Jim, and I play some golf. I do some work with the Naval Academy on my classes gift to the Academy, which is called the Alumni Mentoring Program, a program in which alumni mentor younger folks on their way, either in their military, civilian careers. I do some of that stuff and do some travel and play a little golf. If I hadn't mentioned that, I'm not very good, but get out and play with my wife, and we both have a good time. So we try to spend as much time with our kids and grandkids as we can.
Yeah.
So,
well,
that's about it. Life's good.
So it sounds like you've had a great life. You're still having a great life, and
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us on the channel to share just a fraction of it with us. It's been really riveting. And
Thanks, Steve. You brought a lot of memories out for me, and a lot of fond memories. And I couldn't have done any of this. People used to tell me what a great job I did, and I said, yeah, but I didn't do it without them.
Yeah. Well, I hope that some of them are listening to this now and hearing you say that. And by the sounds of of it, you were that kind of person anyway. They would have known anyway. So, all right, Stan, thanks so much for joining us.
Steve, thank you. Look forward to seeing it.
Cheers.
Take care.